Single mom accidentally hits billionaire boss, but to her surprise, he falls for her at first sight. Before we begin, leave a comment telling us which city you're watching from, and don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10 at the end. Enjoy the story. Hannah Collins had exactly 17 minutes to get across town. 17 minutes to drop Lily at daycare, deliver the inhaler she'd forgotten on the kitchen counter, and clock in at the Riverstone Cafe before her manager made good on his threat to fire her. The rain hammered against her motorcycle helmet as she weaved through early morning traffic on 6th Avenue, her daughter's medication wrapped in plastic inside her jacket pocket. She'd been awake since 4 in the morning. Lily had suffered another asthma attack around 2, and Hannah had spent an hour holding her 5-year-old daughter upright, running the nebulizer, whispering reassurances while her own heart hammered with familiar terror. The medical bills from last month's emergency room visit sat unopened on the kitchen table. The eviction notice was taped to her apartment door. The motorcycle needed an oil change she couldn't afford, but none of that mattered if she lost this job. The traffic light ahead turned yellow. Hannah made a split-second calculation, the kind that poverty forces you to make 100 times a day. Stop and be late, or accelerate and make it through. She twisted the throttle. At the exact same moment, a sleek silver Aston surged forward from the cross street. Hannah's world tilted. She yanked the handlebars right. Her tires lost traction on the wet pavement, and suddenly she was sliding sideways across the intersection. Metal scraped against asphalt. Her motorcycle clipped the rear panel of the Aston Martin with a sickening crunch before finally coming to rest against the curb. For a moment, there was only the sound of rain and her own ragged breathing inside the helmet. Hannah's hand shook as she pushed herself up, checking frantically for injuries. Nothing broken. The motorcycle's mirror was gone, and the side panel crumpled, but she was intact. Lily's inhaler was still safe in her pocket. The driver's door of the Aston Martin opened. A man stepped out, and even through the rain, Hannah could see he didn't belong in her world. Tailored charcoal suit, Italian leather shoes that probably cost more than her rent. Dark hair with just enough gray at the temples to suggest authority. He was maybe 40, with the kind of composed expression that comes from never having to worry about anything as mundane as being late to work. Adrian Blackwell took in the scene with the analytical precision that had built him a technology empire. The woman was already on her feet, removing her helmet with shaking hands, blonde hair plastered to her face, exhausted eyes, cheap motorcycle gear that had seen better years. She couldn't have been more than 30, but she carried herself with the weary dignity of someone who'd been fighting uphill her entire life. "I'm so sorry," Hannah said, her voice tight. "I thought I could make the light. Are you hurt?" Adrian glanced at his car. The rear panel had a significant dent and scrape. $15,000 in damage, perhaps 20. Pocket change. He looked back at the woman, who was staring at the damage with an expression of pure devastation. "I'm fine," he said. "Are you injured?" "No, I'm okay." Hannah pulled out her phone with trembling fingers. "I'll call my insurance. I'll pay for the damage, I promise." Adrian watched her scroll through her phone, saw the cracked screen, noticed the way she was biting her lip to keep it from trembling. He'd built his fortune on reading people, on seeing what others missed, and what he saw now was someone barely holding on. "Your motorcycle is damaged," he observed. "It's fine. It still runs." Hannah looked up at him, and there was something fierce in her eyes, despite the fear. "Look, I know I can't afford to fix your car. I know what I'm looking at here. But I will pay you back, every penny. It might take time, but I keep my word." Something shifted in Adrian's chest. In his world, people constantly tried to impress him, flatter him, use him. This woman had just caused thousands of dollars in damage to his vehicle and was promising to repay it with money she clearly didn't have. There was no manipulation in her voice, no angle, just raw, desperate honesty. "What's your name?" he asked. Hannah Collins." Adrian Blackwell. He extended his hand. She hesitated, then shook it. Her hand was cold and wet from the rain. "Where were you heading in such a hurry, Hannah?" "Work. I'm already late." She glanced at her phone again. "Really late." "What do you do?" "I'm a waitress at the Riverstone Cafe on Pike Street, and if I don't get there in the next 10 minutes, I won't be a waitress anymore." Adrian made a decision. "My car is fine to drive. Yours isn't. Let me give you a ride to work." Hannah blinked. "You want to drive me to work after I just hit your car?"
I want to make sure you get there safely. Consider it my apology for running the yellow light." "I ran the yellow light," Hannah said. "We both did," Adrian replied. "And we both walked away unharmed. That's what matters. The cars can be fixed." 10 minutes later, Hannah found herself in the passenger seat of an Aston Martin that smelled like expensive leather and subtle cologne. Her wet motorcycle gear was leaving water stains on the pristine interior. Adrian drove with calm precision, one hand on the wheel, completely unbothered by the damage to his vehicle or the dripping stranger in his passenger seat. Hannah hugged her arms around herself, acutely aware of how out of place she was. Through the rain-streaked window, she watched the city pass by, the same street she traveled every day, now seen from an entirely different perspective. Adrian glanced at her. "You said you were dropping something off before work." "My daughter's inhaler. She left it at home." Hannah's voice softened. "She has asthma." "How old is she?" 5. Her name is Lily." Adrian absorbed this information quietly. A single mother, working minimum wage, one medical emergency away from complete catastrophe. He'd seen the statistics, read the reports, but statistics didn't prepare you for the reality sitting in your passenger seat, trying not to pry. They pulled up in front of the Riverstone Cafe with 3 minutes to spare. Hannah unbuckled her seatbelt and turned to face him. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwell, for the ride, and for being decent about the accident. I'll get you my insurance information. I'll figure out the payments, I promise."
Adrian pulled a business card from his jacket pocket. "This has my direct number. Call me this afternoon. We'll discuss the repairs." Hannah took the card, saw the embossed logo, the title Founder and CEO, Blackwell Innovations. Her eyes widened slightly. "Oh, you're that Adrian Blackwell. Is that a problem?" A hint of amusement touched his voice. "No, it just makes me hitting your car that much worse." She managed a weak smile. "Thank you again, really." She climbed out of the car and hurried toward the cafe entrance. Adrian watched her go, watched her pause at the door to smooth down her wet hair and straighten her shoulders before walking inside, watched her transform from desperate to determined in the space of a breath. He pulled away from the curb, already thinking, already calculating, already seeing possibilities that hadn't existed 17 minutes ago. Sometimes destiny arrives in a moment of chaos, and sometimes, if you're paying attention, you recognize it for exactly what it is. Adrian Blackwell didn't become a billionaire by ignoring his instincts, and every instinct he possessed was telling him that Hannah Collins was someone worth knowing. He spent the morning in back-to-back meetings at Blackwell Innovations headquarters, a gleaming tower of glass and steel in downtown Seattle. His executive team presented quarterly projections. His board members debated expansion strategies. His lawyers reviewed contracts. But his mind kept returning to a woman on a broken motorcycle, promising to repay a debt she had no way of honoring. During lunch, he made 2 phone calls. The first was to his head of security. "I need a background check. Hannah Collins, works at the Riverstone Cafe on Pike Street. Discreet and thorough." The second call was to his personal assistant. "Clear my schedule for this afternoon. I have an errand to run." By 2 o'clock, he had the information he needed. Hannah Marie Collins, age 28, high school graduate, 3 semesters of community college before dropping out. No criminal record. Rental history showing multiple late payments but no evictions. Previous employment, retail, food services, cleaning services. Current employment, waitress at Riverstone Cafe, 11 months. Daughter, Lillian Collins, age 5, enrolled at Sunshine Daycare. No father listed on the birth certificate. Medical history, emergency room visits for the child, asthma-related. Outstanding balance, $42,000. Adrian closed the file and stared out his office window at the city below. $42,000. A rounding error in his world, a life sentence in hers. He arrived at the Riverstone Cafe at 3:30, during the afternoon lull between lunch and dinner.
The cafe was exactly what he'd expected. Worn vinyl booths, laminate tables, the smell of coffee and fried food. A handful of customers scattered throughout, and Hannah, refilling sugar dispensers at the counter, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She looked up when the door chimed. Recognition flashed across her face, followed immediately by embarrassment. "Mr. Blackwell, I was going to call you after my shift, I swear." Adrian slid onto a stool at the counter. "I was in the neighborhood. Thought I'd save you the call." He glanced at the menu board. "What's good here?" Hannah set down the sugar dispenser. "The coffee's terrible, the pie's decent, and the sandwich special will give you indigestion." She said it without smiling, just stating facts. "Then I'll have coffee and pie." She poured him a cup of coffee that looked like it had been sitting on the burner since morning, then cut him a slice of apple pie that was probably the best thing in the place. Adrian took a sip of the coffee. She was right. It was terrible. Hannah leaned against the counter, her arms crossed. "I've been thinking about payment options. I can give you $200 a month. I know it's not much, but it's what I can manage after rent and Lily's medical expenses." $200 a month would take you roughly 6 years to pay off the damage to my car, Adrian said, assuming no interest. "I know." Hannah met his eyes directly. "But it's all I have." Adrian set down his coffee cup. "What if I told you there was a better way? I'm not interested in loans, if that's what you're offering. I don't want to owe anyone more than I already do."
Not a loan, a job. Hannah straightened. "What kind of job?" "I need an administrative secretary, someone to manage schedules, handle correspondence, organize meetings. The position comes with full benefits, including comprehensive health insurance that covers dependents." He watched her process this, saw the hope flicker in her eyes before skepticism took over. "Why me?" Hannah asked quietly. "You don't know me. You don't know if I'm qualified." "You promised to pay me back for a debt you can't afford. That tells me you're honest. You showed up to work 3 minutes before your shift after a motorcycle accident. That tells me you're reliable. You warned me about the coffee instead of letting me waste my money. That tells me you have integrity." Adrian paused. "As for qualifications, those can be taught. Character can't." Hannah was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was careful. "What's the salary?" Adrian named a figure. It was more than double what she made at the cafe. Not extravagant by corporate standards, but life-changing for someone living on the edge. "That's too much," Hannah said, "for a secretary position." "It's competitive for the Seattle market, and the health insurance alone is worth considering, isn't it?" Hannah's hand went unconsciously to her pocket, where she'd carried Lily's inhaler that morning. Adrian saw the gesture, knew he'd struck the right chord. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "People don't just offer jobs to strangers who hit their car." "Maybe I'm tired of hiring people who tell me what they think I want to hear, instead of the truth about the coffee." Adrian pushed the untouched cup away. "You have something most of my employees don't. You understand what it means to fight for something that matters." Hannah looked at him for a long moment. Behind her exhausted eyes, he could see her calculating, weighing, trying to find the angle. But there was no angle, just an offer that made no sense except for the fact that it did. "When would I start?" she asked. "Monday, if you're interested." "I need to give 2 weeks' notice here." "Give them 1 week. I'll make sure you're paid for both." Hannah picked up a dishcloth and twisted it between her hands. "I can't afford to make a mistake, Mr. Blackwell. Lily depends on me. If this doesn't work out, if I'm not good enough, I need to know you'll be honest with me. I need to know you won't string me along just to be nice." Adrian stood and placed 2 20s on the counter, far too much for coffee and pie. "I didn't build a successful company by being nice, Hannah. I built it by recognizing talent and potential when I see it. You want honesty? Here it is. I think you'll surprise yourself with what you're capable of when you're not running on empty." He headed toward the door, then paused. "One more thing. Your motorcycle.
My assistant will arrange for it to be repaired. Consider it a signing bonus." "Mr. Blackwell, I can't accept that." Adrian turned back to face her. "You're my employee now, and I take care of my employees. That's not charity, it's good business." He left before she could argue further. Through the cafe window, he saw her standing at the counter, still holding the dishcloth, staring at the business card he'd left beside the 20s. Adrian climbed into his car and pulled out his phone. "Call HR," he told his assistant. "I'm sending over details for a new hire. Fast-track the paperwork. I want her badge ready by Monday." As he drove back to the office, he found himself smiling slightly. His board members would think he'd lost his mind. His lawyers would question the liability. His executive team would wonder what he was playing at. But Adrian knew exactly what he was doing. He was gambling on something he rarely encountered in his world: genuine, unvarnished human decency. And if his instincts were right, if Hannah Collins was half as capable as he suspected, then everyone was about to be very surprised. Sometimes the best investments aren't in technology or real estate. Sometimes they're in people, brave enough to promise what they can't deliver, and honest enough to admit when the coffee is terrible. Hannah's first day at Blackwell Innovations began at 7 a.m., 2 hours before her official start time.
She'd arrived early to get her bearings, to walk the gleaming corridors and memorize the layout, to sit in the lobby and watch the employees arrive in their pressed suits and clicking heels. She wore the one professional outfit she owned, a navy blazer she'd found at Goodwill, pressed slacks, and flats that pinched her toes. The security guard who issued her badge smiled kindly. "Welcome to Blackwell, Miss Collins, 20th floor." The elevator rides felt endless. Hannah watched the numbers climb, her stomach knotting with each floor. What was she doing here? She had a high school diploma and half a college degree in general studies. These people had MBAs from prestigious universities. These people belonged. But then she thought of Lily, thought of the new health insurance card in her wallet, thought of the way her daughter had slept through the entire night for the first time in weeks because Hannah wasn't lying awake calculating which bill to pay late. The elevator doors opened onto a reception area that looked like something from a magazine. Floor-to-ceiling windows, modern art on the walls, a receptionist who looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion catalog. "Hannah Collins," Hannah said. "I'm starting today as administrative secretary." The receptionist's smile was professional but distant. "Of course. Mr. Chen will show you to your workspace." David Chen, the office manager, appeared within moments, efficient, friendly, clearly accustomed to training new employees. He walked Hannah through the basics: the phone system, the filing protocol, the coffee station, the supply closet. Her desk was positioned outside a conference room, central to the executive floor, where she could monitor traffic and intercept questions. "Your main responsibility is supporting the executive team with whatever they need," David explained. "Schedule coordination, document preparation, meeting setup. Think of yourself as the oil that keeps the machine running smoothly." Hannah nodded, taking mental notes. She'd worked enough service jobs to understand the real message: make yourself useful, stay invisible, don't cause problems. But invisibility, she quickly learned, wasn't in her nature.
By the end of the first week, Hannah had reorganized the filing system to be more intuitive. She'd noticed that executives were constantly searching for documents that should have been easy to find, so she created a digital index cross-referenced by project, date, and department. It took her 3 late nights to complete, working after everyone else had gone home. She didn't ask permission, she just did it. David Chen found her on Friday evening, still at her desk at 7 o'clock. "You're still here," he observed. "Just finishing up." Hannah saved her work and looked up. "Is that a problem?" "No, the opposite, actually." He gestured to her monitor. "What's this?" Hannah explained the new filing system. Chen listened, then pulled up a document he'd been searching for all week. Found it in seconds. "This is excellent work," he said quietly. "Most new hires spend their first month trying to figure out the coffee machine." "I already know coffee," Hannah replied. "Terrible coffee, good coffee, everything in between." This seemed more useful. By the second week, Hannah had started noticing patterns. The executive assistants were overworked and understaffed. Simple tasks fell through the cracks because everyone assumed someone else was handling them. So Hannah started handling them herself. She refilled coffee stations before meetings. She restocked conference rooms with fresh water and notepads. She learned everyone's names, from the CEO down to the night cleaning crew. Marcus, the custodian who cleaned the 20th floor, was the first to really notice. "You're different from the others," he told her one evening as she helped to move a heavy box of recycling. "They don't usually see us." Hannah smiled. "I've been us most of my life. Hard to forget." Marcus laughed. "Appreciated, Miss Collins. You need anything, you let me know." But it was during her third week that everything changed. Adrian had asked her to sit in on a strategy meeting to take notes. The conference room was full of executives discussing a community outreach computers to schools. The conversation was going in circles. Everyone focused on the tax benefits and publicity angles.
Hannah sat quietly in the corner, transcribing, but she couldn't help noticing the flaw in their plan. "The cheapest computers won't help if the schools don't have reliable internet," one executive said. "We should focus on urban districts where infrastructure is better." Hannah's pen stopped moving. She thought of Lily's daycare, the outdated equipment, the teachers using their own money for supplies. She thought of the community college she'd attended, the computer lab that was always breaking down. Before she could second-guess herself, she spoke. "Excuse me." The room fell silent. 8 executives turned to look at the secretary in the corner. Adrian leaned back in his chair, his expression neutral. "Yes, Hannah?" "The schools that need the computers most are the ones without good internet," she said carefully. "Rural districts, underfunded urban schools. If you only donate to places with infrastructure, you're helping the students who need it least." A pause. Then one of the senior VPs frowned. "And what would you suggest?" "Partner with internet providers. Include hotspot devices with the computers, or focus on offline educational software that doesn't require constant connectivity." Hannah felt her face flush, but kept going. "And maybe ask teachers what they actually need instead of assuming. My daughter's daycare would rather have one good printer than 10 old laptops." Another pause, longer this time. Then Adrian spoke. "That's an excellent point. Who's our liaison with telecommunications companies?" The meeting shifted direction. By the time it ended, they'd completely revised the initiative to include Hannah's suggestions. As everyone filed out, Adrian caught her eye. "Stay for a moment," he said. Hannah's heart sank. She'd overstepped, spoken out of turn, forgotten her place. But when the room emptied, Adrian simply said, "That was good thinking. Don't hesitate to speak up when you see something we're missing." "I thought I was just supposed to take notes," Hannah said quietly.
You are, but I didn't hire you to be invisible. I hire you to pay attention. There's a difference. Over the following weeks, Adrian started inviting her to more meetings, not as decoration, but as a genuine participant. Hannah's observations were often the ones that cut through corporate jargon to identify real problems. She had a talent for seeing what others missed, probably because she'd spent her entire life noticing the small details that meant the difference between surviving and drowning. The other executives started to respect her. When Hannah suggested something, people listened. When she organized something, it ran smoothly. She never demanded credit, never sought the spotlight, but her presence made everything function better. Adrian watched all of this with quiet satisfaction. He'd been right about her. Given the opportunity, given the resources, Hannah Collins wasn't just competent, she was exceptional. And somewhere in those long weeks of early mornings and late nights, somewhere between strategic meetings and reorganized files, something shifted. When Adrian looked at Hannah, he no longer saw a charity case or a lucky accident. He saw someone he relied on, someone he trusted. Someone who made him laugh with her dry observations about terrible coffee and corporate absurdity. someone he was beginning to realize he couldn't imagine working without. But there was a complication, a significant one, and her name was Vivian Hartley. Vivian Hartley had been planning her wedding for 8 months, not because she loved Adrian Blackwell, though she told herself she did, not because she couldn't imagine life without him, though she pretended she couldn't, but because becoming Mrs. Adrian Blackwell was the culmination of everything her life had been designed to achieve. She'd been raised in Connecticut elegance, educated at private schools, groomed to marry well. Her father owned a chain of luxury hotels. Her mother chaired charity galas. Vivian herself had built a social media following of 2 million people who watched her curate a lifestyle of champagne brunches, designer wardrobes, and strategic philanthropy.
Adrian was the perfect final piece. Brilliant, wealthy, respected, and conveniently too busy to notice that their relationship had become a business arrangement, with matching appearances at fundraisers and society events. She'd noticed the distance, of course, the way Adrian's mind was elsewhere during dinners, the way his responses had become perfunctory, the way he looked at her with polite detachment rather than desire. But Vivian had convinced herself it didn't matter. Passion faded, partnerships endured, and their partnership made sense on every logical level. Until Hannah Collins appeared. Vivian first heard the name during a lunch with Adrian's assistant, Caroline, who mentioned the new secretary who'd reorganized the entire filing system in a week. Then she heard it again from Adrian himself when he casually mentioned that Hannah had made an excellent point in a strategy meeting. Then again when he arrived late to a charity dinner because he'd been discussing community outreach with someone on his team. Someone named Hannah. Vivian started paying attention. She visited the Blackwell Innovations office unannounced one afternoon, bringing Adrian lunch as a surprise. He was in a meeting, so she waited in his office, watching through the glass walls as he sat in the conference room with his executive team. And there, in the corner, taking notes on a tablet, was Hannah Collins. Pretty, in an understated way, young but not too young, blonde hair pulled back simply, no expensive clothes, no designer jewelry, nothing that should have registered as a threat. But Vivian watched the way Adrian glanced at Hannah when she spoke, watched the way he listened, really listened, in a way he hadn't listened to Vivian in months. After the meeting, Vivian intercepted Caroline in the hallway. "Tell me about Hannah Collins." Caroline, ever professional, kept her expression neutral. "She's wonderful, incredibly efficient, thoughtful, great with everyone on the team." "Where did Adrian find her?" Caroline hesitated. "I think they met through a personal connection. She started about 6 weeks ago."
Vivian smiled her camera-ready smile. How nice! It's always good to give people opportunities. But inside, something cold was crystallizing. A personal connection. 6 weeks ago, right around the time Adrian had canceled their weekend in Napa, claiming work commitments. 6 weeks ago, when he'd started becoming even more distant than usual. Over the following weeks, Vivian conducted reconnaissance. She followed Hannah on her lunch breaks, watched her eat cheap sandwiches in the park. She learned about Lily from a casual conversation with one of the junior employees. She discovered the apartment in the modest neighborhood, the second-hand motorcycle, the entire life that existed miles below Vivian's world. She should have been reassured. This woman had nothing. She was nobody. But instead, Vivian felt her anxiety growing, because Adrian didn't care about money or status. He'd built his own fortune from scratch. His mother had been a single parent who'd worked 3 jobs to put him through state college. He valued character over pedigree, which meant Hannah Collins, with her quiet competence and her struggling single mother story, was exactly the kind of person Adrian would admire. Vivian watched them at a company event,
saw the easy way they communicated with just a glance, the shorthand that comes from working closely together. She saw how Adrian's expression softened when Hannah mentioned her daughter, saw the respect in his eyes when Hannah made a thoughtful observation. And Vivian realized with growing horror that she was losing him, not to someone more beautiful or wealthier or better connected, but to someone real. The thought was intolerable. She tried confronting Adrian directly one evening over dinner at his penthouse. "You seem very invested in this new secretary of yours." Adrian looked up from his wine. "Hannah? She's excellent at her job." "Carolyn mentioned she came from waitressing. That's quite a career change." "She's proven herself more than capable." Adrian's tone was polite, but firm. "Is there a point to this conversation?" "I just wonder if it's appropriate, having someone so inexperienced in such a visible position."
Hannah has more practical intelligence than half my executive team. If anything, I should have found her sooner. Vivian felt the knife twist. Found her. Like she was something precious he'd discovered. She changed tactics. "I've been thinking about the wedding. We should set a date. Spring, maybe? April in Charleston would be beautiful." Adrian was silent for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "Vivian, I think we need to talk." And Vivian knew with absolute certainty that if she didn't act now, if she didn't remove the obstacle, she would lose everything she'd spent years building toward. "I agree," she said with her perfect smile. "But not tonight. You're tired, and I have an early morning. Let's talk this weekend." She kissed his cheek and left before he could argue, rode the elevator down to the street, sat in her car and stared at the glittering Seattle skyline. Hannah Collins had to go. Not fired, because that would make Adrian suspicious. Something permanent. Something that would destroy her credibility completely. Something that would show Adrian exactly what kind of person he'd been wasting his time on. Vivian pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found what she needed. Bradley Morrison, a mid-level financial analyst at Blackwell Innovations. Ambitious, impressionable, desperate to move up the corporate ladder. She typed a message. "We should have coffee. I have an interesting opportunity to discuss." Within the hour, she had a response. "When and where?" Vivian smiled. Sometimes the best weapons weren't the obvious ones. Sometimes all you needed was patience, planning, and the willingness to do what others wouldn't. Hannah Collins was about to discover that kindness was no match for calculation. And by the time the dust settled, Adrian would see his precious secretary for exactly what she really was, a mistake he'd made when he let sentiment cloud his judgment. Bradley Morrison met Vivian at an upscale coffee shop in Bellevue, far enough from Blackwell Innovations that no one would notice them together. He arrived nervous, smoothing his tie, checking his reflection in the window. Vivian was already seated in a corner booth, looking effortlessly elegant in cashmere and pearls. "Bradley," she said warmly, "thank you for meeting me." "Of course, Miss Hartley." He slid into the booth across from her. "Your message said you had an opportunity." Vivian stirred her latte slowly. "I've been observing the company. Adrian values my input on personnel matters. And I've noticed someone with real potential, someone who could use a mentor." Bradley leaned forward. "I'm definitely interested in mentorship opportunities." "I'm glad to hear that, because there's a small project I need help with, something that requires discretion and technical skill." Vivian set down her spoon. "It involves the corporate expense system." She spent the next 20 minutes laying out the plan. Not all at once. Not in terms that sounded criminal. Just small suggestions. Technical questions. Hypothetical scenarios. She was careful to frame everything as legitimate oversight, catching potential fraud, protecting the company's interests.
There's concern that one of the newer employees might be misusing company resources, Vivian explained. But we need proof before making accusations. I need someone who can access the expense system and create a paper trail. Someone discreet. "Who's the employee?" Bradley asked. She paused for effect. "Hannah Collins, Adrian's new secretary." She saw the recognition in Bradley's eyes. Everyone knew Hannah. Everyone had heard how she'd risen from waitress to secretary in a matter of weeks, how Adrian listened to her in meetings, how she seemed to have influence beyond her position. Vivian leaned in, her voice sympathetic. "I know she seems nice, but consider how unusual her hiring was. No corporate experience, no degree, suddenly working directly with the CEO. It raises questions, doesn't it?" "I guess so," Bradley said slowly. "I'm not saying she's definitely doing anything wrong, but Adrian is generous to a fault, and unfortunately, some people take advantage. If Hannah is clean, this investigation will exonerate her. If she's not, well, better we find out now." "What exactly would I need to do?" Vivian pulled out her tablet and showed him a detailed plan. Request a corporate card in Hannah's name.
Make some purchases at specific retailers. Upload the receipts to her expense account. Create a pattern that suggests personal use of company funds. Isn't that, Bradley hesitated, wouldn't that be fraud? It would be fraud if she were innocent. But if she's already misusing funds and we're just documenting the pattern, then it's evidence gathering. Vivian's eyes were steady. Think about it, Bradley. Adrian trusts you to handle sensitive information. This is your chance to show real initiative. And when this comes to light, when you're the one who helped protect the company, where do you think that leaves you? Bradley thought about his studio apartment, his student loans, the promotion he'd been passed over for twice. He thought about Hannah Collins, who jumped the line without paying her dues, who had Adrian's ear without earning it. "What's in it for me?" he asked. "Recognition. A personal recommendation from me to the executive team, and a $20,000 consulting fee for your discretion and technical expertise." $20,000. 6 months of rent. A year of loan payments. "I'd need assurances," Bradley said. "Something in writing." Of course. Vivian had anticipated this. "We'll draft a consulting agreement. Completely above board. You're advising me on technical systems oversight. That's all anyone needs to know." Over the next 2 weeks, Bradley did exactly as instructed. He requested a corporate card using Vivian's executive authorization code, but Hannah's employee information. He made purchases at boutiques Vivian frequented, using cash she provided, then uploaded the receipts to Hannah's expense profile with backdated timestamps. He was careful, methodical, creating a trail that looked damning but not obvious. Vivian had chosen the purchases carefully. Children's clothing from expensive stores, restaurant charges from places Hannah could never afford, a laptop, a designer handbag, jewelry. Each item plausible enough that Hannah might have convinced herself she deserved it, expensive enough to constitute serious theft. The total came to just under $30,000, enough to be devastating, not so much that it would trigger immediate automated alerts.
When the trail was complete, Vivian made her final move. She drafted an anonymous email to Blackwell Innovations' compliance department. Professional, concerned, detailed. She included screenshots of Hannah's expense account, highlighted the suspicious purchases, suggested that someone should investigate before the situation escalated. She sent it on a Friday afternoon when people were tired and likely to react quickly. Then she waited. The compliance department flagged the account within hours. By Monday morning, Hannah's card was frozen and an investigation was underway. By Monday afternoon, the evidence had been escalated to HR and the chief financial officer. Vivian watched it unfold from a distance, checking in with her sources, monitoring the gossip. People were shocked. Hannah had seemed so honest, so hard-working, but the evidence was irrefutable. The purchases were right there in the system. The card had her name on it. Bradley called her Tuesday evening, panicked. "They're investigating. They're going to find out." "They're going to find exactly what we wanted them to find," Vivian said calmly. "A pattern of fraud committed by Hannah Collins. Your job was system oversight. You have documentation proving that. Stay calm and stick to the story." "What if she fights back?" "With what? She has no proof of innocence. We have proof of guilt." Vivian's voice was ice. "This is over, Bradley. Hannah Collins is finished." On Wednesday morning, Hannah was called into a meeting with HR, and Vivian, sitting in a cafe across town, allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. Sometimes winning meant playing a longer game. Sometimes it meant getting your hands dirty. Sometimes it meant destroying someone piece by piece so thoroughly that no one would ever believe their protests of innocence. Adrian would be disappointed at first, but he would recover. He would see that Vivian had protected him from making a terrible mistake, and their wedding would go forward as planned. Everything would return to exactly how it was supposed to be.
Hannah sat in the HR conference room, her hands folded on the table, trying to understand what was happening. Across from her sat Jennifer Martinez from Human Resources and Richard Chen, the Chief Financial Officer. Their expressions were professional but grave. "Miss Collins," Jennifer began, "we've asked you here to discuss some irregularities with your corporate expense account." "I don't have a corporate expense account," Hannah said. "I've never been issued a company card." Jennifer and Richard exchanged glances. Richard slid a folder across the table. "According to our records, you were issued a corporate American Express card on September 15th. The card has been active for approximately 6 weeks. Hannah opened the folder. Inside were printouts of transactions. Nordstrom's, $800. Il Terrazzo Carmine, $347. Seattle Children's Boutique, $1,200. On and on, page after page. "I didn't make these purchases," Hannah said, her voice tight. "I've never even heard of half these places." "The card was requested using your employee credentials and activated with your information," Richard said. "The purchases align with your profile. Children's items, women's clothing, electronics." Hannah felt the room tilting. Her profile. She looked more closely at the dates. September 17th, a charge at a restaurant she'd never been to. September 20th, a laptop she didn't own. October 3rd, a designer handbag that cost more than her monthly rent. "This isn't me," she said firmly. "Someone else did this. I don't know how, but I never requested this card. I never made these purchases." Jennifer's expression was sympathetic, but skeptical. "I understand this is difficult, Hannah, but the evidence is quite clear. We need you to explain these transactions." "I can't explain them because I didn't make them." Hannah heard her voice rising and forced herself to stay calm. "Check the security footage. Check the signatures. I've never been to these stores." "The charges were made online and in person," Richard said. "We're reviewing footage, but that takes time. Right now, we need to understand why you used company resources for personal expenses." "I didn't!" Hannah wanted to scream, to throw the folder across the room, to make them understand. "Please, you can check my bank account. I don't have any of these items."
I live in a 500-square-foot apartment. Where would I even keep a $1,200 laptop? We'll need access to your apartment to verify that, Jennifer said gently. Fine, come right now. You won't find anything. Hannah's hands were shaking. Please, this is a mistake. Someone is setting me up. Who would set you up? Richard asked. And why? Hannah opened her mouth, then closed it. She didn't know. She couldn't imagine who would do this or why. She'd been kind to everyone. She'd worked hard. She'd never made enemies. Unless... A cold thought crystallized. Vivian.
But that was insane. Why would Adrian's fiancé care about a secretary? They'd barely spoken. Vivienne existed in an entirely different world. But Hannah remembered the way Vivienne had looked at her during that office visit, the questions Caroline had mentioned her asking, the subtle once-over she'd given Hannah's outfit. "I think Adrian's fiancé might be involved," Hannah said quietly. Jennifer's eyebrows rose. "That's a serious accusation. Do you have any evidence?" "No." Hannah felt her last hope crumbling. "Just a feeling." Richard closed his folder. "Miss Collins, we take these matters very seriously. Until we complete our investigation, you're being placed on administrative leave. You'll need to surrender your badge and any company property. We'll schedule a follow-up meeting once we've reviewed all the evidence." "How long will that take?" Hannah whispered. "At least 2 weeks, possibly longer. 2 weeks without pay. 2 weeks with bills piling up. 2 weeks of Lily asking why Mommy wasn't going to work." "I need to speak with Adrian," Hannah said. "Mr. Blackwell. He needs to know what's happening." "Mr. Blackwell has been informed," Jennifer said. "He's aware of the situation." Those words landed like a physical blow. Adrian knew. Adrian had been told his secretary was a thief, and he hadn't come to her defense, hadn't called her, hadn't asked for her side of the story. Hannah stood on shaking legs. "Can I get my things from my desk?"
"We'll have someone pack them and send them to you," Richard said. "I'm sorry, but you can't access the building during the investigation." 20 minutes later, Hannah stood on the sidewalk outside Blackwell Innovations, her badge surrendered, her career in ruins. The Seattle rain had started again, cold and relentless. She didn't have an umbrella. Her motorcycle was in the parking garage, but her access card wouldn't work anymore. She called a rideshare, waited in the rain, and tried not to cry. When she got home, Lily was at daycare. The apartment was silent, except for the drip of the kitchen faucet she couldn't afford to fix. Hannah sat at the table and stared at the eviction notice she'd finally been able to remove last month, the medical bills she'd started paying down, the future that had seemed, for the first time in years, manageable. All of it gone. Again. Her phone rang. Adrian's number. Hannah stared at it, watched it ring 3 times, 4, 5. Then she declined the call. If he believed she was a thief, if he thought her capable of stealing from the company that had given her a chance, then there was nothing left to say. She picked up Lily from daycare early, held her daughter close, and tried to figure out how to explain that everything had fallen apart again. Tried to find words that wouldn't scare a 5-year-old. Tried to be strong when she felt completely broken. That night, after Lily fell asleep, Hannah sat in the dark and let herself cry. Not because of the job, or the money, or even the injustice, but because for a brief, foolish moment she'd believed in something, believed that hard work mattered, believed that someone saw her value, believed that she'd finally found solid ground. And now she was right back where she'd started, falling through space with nothing to hold on to. The first 3 days were the hardest. Hannah went through the motions of normal life while everything inside her screamed. She made Lily breakfast. She walked her to daycare. She smiled and said, yes, everything's fine, when the teachers asked if she was feeling all right. She picked Lily up in the afternoon, took her to the park, read her stories, tucked her into bed. But at night, alone in the dark, Hannah couldn't escape the thoughts that circled like vultures. What if they pressed charges?
What if she ended up with a criminal record? What if she lost custody of Lily because she couldn't prove her innocence? The 4th day, she forced herself to do something productive. She called a lawyer, the kind who advertises on bus benches. The consultation was free. His assessment was not encouraging. The evidence is circumstantial, he said, but it's substantial. Unless you can prove someone else made these purchases, it's your word against the documentation, and documentation usually wins. What if I can't afford to fight this? Hannah asked. Then you take whatever deal they offer and hope it doesn't include jail time. Hannah thanked him and hung up, sat staring at her phone for 20 minutes. Then she did something she'd sworn she'd never do. She called her mother. They hadn't spoken in 3 years, not since her mother had told her that getting pregnant by a man who'd disappeared was the predictable result of Hannah's poor judgment. Not since her mother had made it clear that help would only come with conditions Hannah couldn't accept. The phone rang 4 times. Then her mother's voice, wary and cold. Hannah? Hi, Mom. I need help. She explained the situation in broad strokes, leaving out the details that would invite criticism. Her mother listened in silence. How much do you need? She asked finally. I need a lawyer, someone good. Maybe $5,000 to start? Her mother laughed, a bitter sound. $5,000 for what, Hannah? So you can keep pretending you're better than waitressing. So you can keep chasing jobs you're not qualified for. Mom, I didn't steal anything. I'm being framed. That's what they all say. Her mother's voice was heavy with old disappointment. You made your choices. You thought you could do it all on your own. Now you want help when it suits you. Please, Hannah hated the begging in her voice. Not from me, for Lily. If I have a criminal record, I might lose her. A long pause. Then, perhaps that would be for the best. You clearly can't provide stability for that child. Maybe she'd be better off with people who can.
Hannah ended the call, sat holding the phone, feeling something inside her turn to ice. She'd been abandoned before, by Lily's father, by the world in 1,000 small ways. But somehow, hearing it from her own mother still had the power to wound. The 5th day, Hannah applied for unemployment. The process was humiliating, requiring her to explain the gap in employment, the reason she'd left her last job. She lied and said she'd been laid off. The truth would disqualify her. The 6th day, she started applying for new jobs. Every cafe in Seattle, retail positions, cleaning services, anything that would hire someone under investigation for corporate theft, which meant almost nothing. By the 7th day, she'd received exactly 1 callback from a gas station looking for overnight cashiers. The pay was minimum wage. The shift was 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. She'd never see Lily. But she scheduled the interview anyway. That night, Lily had an asthma attack. Not terrible, but bad enough to need the nebulizer, to need Hannah's calm voice and steady hands. When it passed, when Lily finally fell back asleep, Hannah sat beside her daughter's bed and did the math. If she took the gas station job, she'd need to find overnight childcare, which didn't exist for what she could afford. She could ask the daycare for extended hours, but they closed at 6. She could try to find a roommate to watch Lily, but she'd been burned before by people who made promises and disappeared. Or she could accept what was becoming increasingly obvious: she was out of options. On the 8th day, Hannah received an email from Blackwell Innovations. The subject line read, "Investigation Update." Her hands shook as she opened it. Dear Ms. Collins, our investigation into the corporate card misuse is ongoing. We have reviewed security footage from several retailers and confirmed that purchases were made by an individual matching your description. We are prepared to discuss a settlement agreement that would resolve this matter without criminal prosecution. Please contact our legal department to schedule a meeting. Sincerely, Jennifer Martinez, Human Resources.
An individual matching your description. Hannah stared at that phrase. Blonde hair, about 5'6", thin build. It described half the women in Seattle. But it was enough. Enough to make the case against her stronger. Enough to make a settlement seem like mercy. Hannah closed her laptop and went to check on Lily. Her daughter was coloring at the kitchen table, humming to herself, oblivious to the disaster unfolding around them. She looked up and smiled. "Mommy, I drew you a picture. It's us at the park." Hannah took the drawing. 2 stick figures holding hands, a sun, some trees, a world where everything was simple and safe. "It's beautiful, baby," Hannah whispered. "Can we go to the park today?" "Maybe tomorrow. Mommy has some things to take care of today." Lily nodded and went back to coloring. And Hannah stood in the kitchen, holding a child's drawing, feeling the walls closing in, feeling the weight of every mistake she'd ever made, every choice that had led her to this moment. She had fought so hard, worked so hard, believed so desperately that effort and honesty mattered. But maybe her mother was right. Maybe she'd been foolish to reach for something better. Maybe she should have stayed in her lane, accepted her limitations, stopped hoping for more. That night, after Lily was asleep, Hannah sat in the dark and finally, fully understood what despair felt like. Adrian Blackwell had built his empire on instinct, and every instinct he possessed was screaming that something was wrong. He'd listened to the HR report, reviewed the expense records, examined the evidence with the same analytical precision he applied to every business decision, and none of it made sense. Hannah Collins was many things: proud, stubborn, fiercely independent. She had tried to pay for damage to his car when she could barely afford groceries. She'd worked double shifts to avoid asking for favors. The woman he'd come to know would sooner steal food to feed her daughter than steal luxury goods for herself. But the evidence was damning. The card existed, the purchases were real, the documentation was thorough. Almost too thorough.
Adrian had spent 20 years in business. He knew what fraud looked like when it was committed hastily, desperately. This wasn't that. This was precise, methodical, designed to look authentic while remaining just suspicious enough to be discovered. This was a setup. He called Hannah 3 times in the days following her suspension. She never answered. He went to her apartment once, knocked on the door, heard movement inside, but no response. He left a note. "Please call me. I know you didn't do this." The note was still there the next day, uncollected. On the 4th day of the investigation, Adrian did something he rarely did. He bypassed his own company's protocols and hired an outside security firm. Not the usual corporate investigators, but specialists in financial forensics and digital tracking. "I need to know who accessed the expense system and when," he told Marcus Webb, the lead investigator. "I need to know where the card was requested, who approved it, and who made the actual purchases, and I need it done discreetly." Webb was professional, efficient, expensive. He started working immediately. Adrian, meanwhile, started his own investigation. He reviewed security footage from the Blackwell Innovations building, tracking every person who'd accessed the 20th floor during the relevant time period. He interviewed IT staff about system access logs. He spoke quietly with Caroline about office dynamics, about who had seemed interested in Hannah, who had asked questions. And one name kept appearing in the periphery: Bradley Morrison. Adrian hadn't paid much attention to Morrison before. Mid-level financial analyst, competent but unremarkable. Ambitious in the way many young employees were ambitious. But when Adrian started looking closely, patterns emerged. Morrison had accessed the expense system outside normal business hours. Morrison had requested corporate cards before, always with proper authorization, but the timing was interesting. Adrian called Morrison into his office on the 6th day of the investigation. "Bradley, thanks for coming in." Adrian gestured to a chair. "I'm reviewing some system access logs and noticed you've been working late recently. Anything I should know about?"
Morrison shifted uncomfortably. "Just catching up on quarterly reports, Mr. Blackwell, trying to stay ahead of deadline." "Admirable." Adrian kept his tone casual. "You've been with the company for what, 3 years now?" "Almost 4.
And you're familiar with our expense card protocols? Of course, it's part of my job to monitor them. Have you noticed any irregularities lately, besides the situation with Miss Collins? Morrison's face flushed slightly. No, sir. Nothing beyond what's already been reported. Adrian nodded slowly. If you do notice anything, I'd appreciate you bringing it directly to me. Sometimes patterns emerge that aren't obvious at first glance. Absolutely, Mr. Blackwell. After Morrison left, Adrian made a note. The flush, the shifted posture, the slightly too quick denial. Morrison was nervous about something. On the 7th day, Webb's preliminary report arrived. Adrian read it in his office with the door closed, his expression growing darker with each page. The corporate card had been requested using an executive-level authorization code, not Hama's credentials. The code belonged to Vivian Hartley, who had standing permission to request cards for staff working on her charitable initiatives. The purchases had been made at stores Vivian frequented. 3 of them had surveillance footage showing a woman who, while blonde and approximately Hannah's height, moved differently, more confident, more familiar with the surroundings. Webb had enhanced one image. The woman was wearing sunglasses and a scarf, but the profile was wrong. The bone structure didn't match. And the final piece? Bradley Morrison had received a wire transfer of $20,000 3 days before the card was activated. The source? A consulting firm that, upon investigation, turned out to be owned by Vivian's father. Adrian sat back in his chair and closed his eyes. He'd suspected, but having proof was different.
Having proof meant acknowledging that the woman he'd been planning to marry had deliberately destroyed an innocent person to protect her own interests. He called Webb. Continue the investigation. I want every detail documented, every transaction traced. I want this airtight. Then he called his lawyer. I'm going to need you to prepare severance documentation for an employee. Generous package, full benefits continuation, confidentiality agreement. And I want a settlement drafted for Ms. Collins. Full back pay, compensation for damages, restoration of her record. His lawyer was quiet for a moment. Are we acknowledging fault? We're acknowledging that a grave injustice was done. I want it corrected immediately. Finally, Adrian pulled out his phone and sent a text to Hannah. I know the truth. I know who did this. Please let me explain. He stared at the screen for 20 minutes. No response. That evening, he drove to Hannah's apartment again. This time, when he knocked, the door opened. Hannah stood there in sweatpants and an old t-shirt, her hair pulled back, her eyes exhausted. What do you want? She asked quietly. To tell you that I'm sorry, that I should have believed you from the start, that I know Vivian set you up and I'm fixing it. Hannah's expression didn't change. That's great. Can I have it in writing? Adrian pulled out the settlement agreement his lawyer had prepared. This restores your position, compensates you for lost wages, and includes a bonus for the distress caused. Your record will be completely cleared. Hannah took the papers, scanned them quickly. And what about Vivian? What happens to her? She's no longer part of my life. The engagement is over. Because she got caught, or because you actually believe I'm innocent? Adrian met her eyes. Because I knew you were innocent before I had proof. I just needed the proof to act on it. Hannah handed back the papers. I don't want your petty employment, Mr. Blackwell. I don't want to be the charity case you protect because your fiancé was cruel. I just want to be left alone. This isn't pity, Hannah. This is correction of an injustice. Then prove it. She crossed her arms. Don't just fix my record. Make sure everyone knows what Vivian did. Make sure Bradley Morrison faces consequences. Make sure this can't happen to someone else who doesn't have a CEO who believes in them. Adrian nodded slowly. I can do that. Then I'll think about your settlement. Hannah started to close the door. But right now, I need to be with my daughter. We've had a hard week. The door closed.
Adrian stood in the hallway, holding settlement papers that suddenly felt meaningless. He'd built an empire on solving problems efficiently. But this wasn't a problem that could be solved with money or lawyers. This was trust, shattered. This was dignity, wounded. This was a woman who'd been fighting her entire life, and he'd been part of the reason she'd nearly given up. Money couldn't fix that. Position couldn't fix that. Only time and truth could fix that. And Adrian was prepared to invest as much of both as necessary. The confrontation with Vivian happened in Adrian's penthouse at 10 o'clock on a Thursday night. She'd come expecting a reconciliation dinner, wearing a designer dress and her practiced smile. Instead, she found Adrian waiting with a folder of evidence and an expression she'd never seen before. "Sit down," he said quietly. Vivian's smile faltered. "Adrian, what's wrong?" He slid the folder across the table. "This is what's wrong." She opened it, saw the expense records, the wire transfer documentation, the enhanced surveillance photos. Her face went pale, then flushed with anger. "You investigated me?" Her voice was sharp. "Your own fiancé?" "I investigated a crime. The fact that you committed it is unfortunate, but relevant." Vivian stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous. That woman manipulated you. She probably created these documents herself to make me look bad." "Hannah doesn't have the technical expertise to falsify wire transfers or security footage, but you have the money to hire people who do." Adrian's voice remained calm.
You paid Bradley Morrison $20,000 to set her up. You used your executive access to request the card. You made the purchases yourself. Vivian's hands clenched. She was a threat, can't you see that? She was ordinary, Adrian, common. And you were looking at her like she mattered, like she was important. She does matter. She is important. More important than me? Vivian's voice rose. I'm the one who's been by your side at every event. I'm the one who understands your world. That woman served coffee for a living. And yet, she has more integrity in her worn-out shoes than you have in your entire designer wardrobe. Adrian stood. The engagement is over, Vivian. I've already had your things moved out. My lawyers will contact you about returning the ring. You can't be serious. Vivian's shock was giving way to fury. You're choosing a single mother waitress over me, over everything we've built? We built nothing. We had an arrangement that benefited both our families. That's not a marriage. That's not even a partnership. So that's it? You're just going to humiliate me publicly? Adrian's expression hardened. I could press charges for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted theft. I could make sure everyone knows exactly what you did. Instead, I'm offering you a quiet exit. Take it and be grateful. Vivian grabbed her purse, her hand shaking. You're making a mistake. That woman will never fit into your life. She'll embarrass you. She'll drag you down to her level. Or maybe she'll remind me what it means to be decent. Adrian walked to the door and opened it. Goodbye, Vivian. She stopped in the doorway. When this falls apart, when you realize what you've lost, don't come crying to me. I won't, he said simply, because I know exactly what I have lost, and it's not you. After Vivian left, Adrian poured himself a drink and stood at the window, looking out at the Seattle skyline. 20 years of building a fortune, and only now was he understanding what actually mattered. The next morning, he called an all-staff meeting at Blackwell Innovations. 200 employees gathered in the main conference center, curious and concerned. Rumors had been circulating for days. Adrian stood at the podium and spoke clearly. I'm here to address the situation with Hannah Collins and to make an announcement about our corporate integrity policies. He explained what had happened, not in vague terms, but with specifics. Vivienne's name, Bradley Morrison's role, the fabricated evidence, the investigation results. He held nothing back.
Miss Collins was the victim of a deliberate attempt to destroy her reputation, Adrian said. I failed her by not believing her immediately. This company failed her by not investigating thoroughly enough before taking action. We will do better. He announced new oversight procedures, independent review boards for fraud investigations, mandatory waiting periods before suspensions, anonymous reporting systems. Every measure designed to prevent this from happening again. Bradley Morrison has been terminated, Adrian continued, and I've asked Miss Collins to return to Blackwell Innovations in a position commensurate with her actual value to this company. The room was silent. I don't know if she'll accept, Adrian said honestly. She has every reason to tell us all to go to hell, but I hope she gives us another chance, because companies, like people, can learn from their mistakes. That afternoon, he went to Hannah's apartment one more time. She answered the door looking exhausted but calmer. I saw the news, she said. You went public. You asked me to make sure everyone knew the truth. I did. Hannah stepped aside. Come in. The apartment was small, tidy, filled with evidence of Lily's presence, children's drawings on the refrigerator, toys neatly organized in a corner, the faint smell of macaroni and cheese. Adrian sat at the kitchen table. I meant what I said in the meeting. I want you back, not as a secretary, as Director of Community Initiatives. You'd oversee all our outreach programs, report directly to me, and have the authority to actually make the changes you suggested in those meetings. That's a big jump from administrative secretary.
You were never just a secretary, Hannah. You were already doing executive-level thinking. I should have recognized it sooner. Hannah sat across from him. What about Lily? She has needs. School events, doctor appointments, asthma attacks. I can't pretend she doesn't exist. Then don't pretend. Bring her to the office when you need to. Set your own hours. Work remotely when necessary. Adrian leaned forward. I'm not asking you to choose between your daughter and your career. I'm asking you to let me support both. Why? Hannah's voice was quiet. Why does this matter so much to you? Adrian was silent for a long moment. Because when I look at you, I see the person my mother was, working 3 jobs to keep me fed and in school, proud, stubborn, refusing charity while desperately needing help. He met her eyes, and I see the person I was supposed to become, the one who remembers where he came from, who uses his advantages to create opportunities, not to insulate himself from reality. That's a lot of weight to put on someone you barely know. Then let me get to know you better, as colleagues, as friends, as whatever develops naturally without pressure or expectations. Hannah looked at him for a long time. Finally, she said, I need time to think, to talk to Lily, to figure out if I can trust this. Take all the time you need. Adrian stood. But Hannah, I'm not going anywhere. Whether you come back or not, I'm going to make sure you and Lily are taken care of. That's not conditional on employment. That's just how it should have been from the start. After he left, Hannah sat at the table and cried. Not from sadness or anger, but from something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real, fragile, terrifying hope. Hannah returned to Blackwell Innovations 3 weeks later, on a Monday morning in November. She wore a new suit, purchased with the settlement money. Her hair was styled professionally. Her badge said Director of Community Initiatives. But the biggest change was internal. She walked into the building with her head high, no longer apologizing for taking up space. The executive floor erupted in applause when she stepped off the elevator.
People she'd helped, people who'd witnessed the injustice, people who were simply glad to see competence rewarded. Hannah felt her eyes sting but smiled and thanked them. Adrian appeared in his office doorway. Welcome back, Hannah. Thank you for the second chance. You earned it long before I acknowledged it.
Her new office was next to Adrian's, with windows overlooking the city and a desk large enough to spread out project plans. On the desk was a framed photo. Lily, grinning, holding a fish she'd caught on their recent trip to the lake. Hannah had spent the 3 weeks off doing things she'd never had time for. She'd taken Lily to museums. They'd baked cookies. They'd gone to the park without Hannah constantly checking her phone, worried about being late. And she thought carefully about Adrian's offer. Not just the job, but everything it represented. He'd called twice during those weeks, not to pressure her, just to check in. Once to tell her that the health insurance was active regardless of her decision. Once to invite her and Lily to a Seahawks game, no strings attached. They'd gone. Lily had loved it. Adrian had been patient and kind, explaining the game to a 5-year-old with genuine interest. No flash, no showing off. Just a man spending time with people he cared about. Now, settling into her new role, Hannah opened her laptop and reviewed the projects she'd be overseeing. The computer donation initiative they'd redesigned, a scholarship program for single parents, a mentorship system connecting Blackwell employees with underserved students, programs that would have helped someone like her, programs that would help hundreds of people like her. Adrian appeared in her doorway around noon. Lunch? They went to a small cafe, not expensive but comfortable. Over sandwiches, they talked about strategy, about goals, about the metrics they'd use to measure success. But they also talked about other things. Hannah told him about Lily's obsession with dinosaurs. Adrian told her about the summer he'd spent working construction to pay for college. Easy conversation, natural.
You know, Hannah said, people are going to talk about us working so closely together.
Let them talk. Adrian's voice was calm. I know the truth. You know the truth. That's what matters.
And what is the truth? That you're brilliant at your job, that I'm lucky to have you on my team, that anything else would be a bonus, not an expectation. Hannah appreciated his directness. Good, because I'm not ready for anything else. I need to focus on Lily, on this position, on rebuilding. I understand, and I'm in no hurry. Over the following months, Hannah proved herself repeatedly. The community initiatives flourished under her leadership. Schools received the technology and support they needed. Scholarships went to students who would otherwise dropped out. The company's reputation improved, attracting talent who valued purpose alongside profit. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, something shifted between Hannah and Adrian. They started having coffee together in the mornings. He'd ask about Lily's asthma management, genuinely interested in the details. She'd offer perspective on business decisions, and he'd implement her suggestions. Lily met Adrian more frequently. Sometimes he'd stop by Hannah's office and find the 5-year-old coloring at the conference table while Hannah finished a report. He'd sit down and color with her, asking about her drawings, making her laugh. One evening, 6 months after Hannah's return, Adrian picked them up for dinner. Nothing fancy, just burgers and fries. Lily chattered about her day. Hannah watched Adrian listen with complete attention, saw the gentleness in his responses. After Lily fell asleep in the car on the way home, Hannah said quietly, "Thank you." For what? For being patient, for understanding that my life is complicated. Adrian glanced at her. Your life isn't complicated, Hannah. It's full. There's a difference. He helped carry Lily upstairs, waited while Hannah tucked her daughter into bed, then accepted the coffee Hannah offered. They sat at the small kitchen table, the same table where Hannah had once calculated which bills to pay late.
I've been thinking, Adrian said, about us, about where this might be going. Hannah set down her coffee. And I want you to know there's no pressure, no expectations. But I also want to be honest. He met her eyes. I care about you. I care about Lily. I want to be part of your lives, if you'll let me. Hannah was quiet for a moment. I care about you too. But I need you to understand something. Lily comes first, always. If being with me means signing up for asthma attacks at 2 a.m., for school plays and parent-teacher conferences, for a life that's messy and unpredictable, then you need to be sure." "I am sure," Adrian said simply. "I've spent 20 years building something impressive, but none of it means much if I'm doing it alone. You and Lily, you remind me what actually matters." Hannah reached across the table and took his hand. "Then let's take this slow. Let's build something real." And they did. Over the next year, they built a relationship based on honesty and respect. Adrian became a fixture in Lily's life, not trying to replace the father she'd never known, but offering stability and support. Hannah continued excelling in her career, becoming one of the most respected voices in corporate social responsibility. They faced challenges. Lily's asthma sometimes required emergency room visits. Hannah's trust, damaged by years of struggle and Vivian's betrayal, took time to fully rebuild. Adrian's work demanded long hours and travel, but they navigated it together, with patience, with communication, with the understanding that love isn't about grand gestures, but about showing up consistently, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. 2 years after the accident that changed everything, Hannah stood at Blackwell Innovations headquarters at a celebration she'd organized herself, the Community Impact Gala, showcasing the results of their initiatives. The room was filled with scholarship recipients, school administrators, community leaders. Young people who'd received laptops and mentorship were presenting their projects. Single parents who'd completed the training program were sharing their success stories.
Hannah moved through the crowd, shaking hands, accepting thanks, feeling a satisfaction that had nothing to do with recognition and everything to do with real change. Adrian found her near the dessert table. "You did this," he said quietly. "All of this." "We did this," Hannah corrected. "The company funded it, you believed in it, but you made it real." Lily appeared, now 7 years old, wearing a dress she'd picked out herself. "Mommy, can I have cake?" "After you eat some real food," Hannah said automatically. Then noticed Adrian holding out a plate with vegetables and chicken. "Already taken care of," he said with a smile. Lily grinned and accepted the plate. "Thanks, Adrian." Hannah watched her daughter settle at a table with some of the other children, completely at ease. Her asthma was better controlled now, thanks to consistent medical care and a home environment free from the stress of poverty. She was thriving. "You're good with her," Hannah told Adrian. "She's easy to be good with." He paused. "Hannah, there's something I want to talk to you about." Hannah raised an eyebrow. "That sounds ominous." "Not ominous, just important." Adrian led her to a quieter corner of the room. "I've been thinking about the future, about what we're building together." "We're building a lot of things together." "I mean personally." He pulled a small box from his pocket. Hannah felt her breath catch. "I'm not proposing," Adrian said quickly. "Not yet. Not until you're ready. But I wanted you to have this." He opened the box. Inside was a key. "To my house. To our house, if you want it to be." Hannah looked at the key, then at Adrian. "You're asking us to move in with you?" "I'm asking if you'd consider it. No pressure, just an offer. More space for Lily, a yard, a better school district. And mostly a chance to actually live together instead of scheduling our lives around separate addresses."
Hannah thought about her apartment, the place she'd fought so hard to keep. It had been her refuge, her proof of survival. But it had also been a reminder of struggle. What she had with Adrian wasn't about escape. It was about partnership, building something new together. "I'd like that," she said softly. "But I want to contribute. Rent or utilities or something. I can't just be taken care of." "How about this? You handle the community initiatives budget. That's roughly $3 million a year. I'd say you're contributing plenty." Hannah laughed. "Fair point." Adrian closed the box and placed it in her hand. Take your time. Think about it. Talk to Lily. This is a decision for both of you. That night, back at her apartment, Hannah sat with Lily and showed her pictures of Adrian's house. The yard with the swing set he'd already installed, the room that could be Lily's with big windows and space for all her toys. What do you think, baby? Should we live with Adrian? Lily considered seriously. Will he read me bedtime stories? If you want him to. And can we get a dog? Hannah smiled. We can talk about it. Then yes, Lily said simply. I like Adrian. He's nice to you, and he always remembers the inhalers. Out of the mouths of 7-year-olds, Hannah thought, the measure of a good person remembers the inhalers. 3 months later, they moved, not just into Adrian's house, but into a life that felt, finally, sustainable. Hannah kept working, kept pushing for change. Adrian kept supporting her vision while running his company. Lily kept growing, kept laughing, kept being the reason Hannah had fought so hard in the first place. And one evening, almost 3 years to the day after Hannah's motorcycle had crashed into Adrian's car, he found her in the kitchen making dinner. Lily was at a friend's house. The moment was quiet, domestic, perfect. Adrian leaned against the counter. I have a question. Hannah looked up from the vegetables she was chopping. Shoot. Remember when I gave you the key and said I wasn't proposing yet? I remember. I'd like to revise that position.
He got down on one knee. Hannah set down the knife, her heart suddenly racing. Hannah Collins, you are the strongest, most remarkable person I've ever met. You've changed my company, changed my perspective, changed my life, and I would be honored if you let me be your partner, officially and permanently. Will you marry me? Hannah looked at him. This man who'd seen her at her worst and loved her anyway, who'd believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself, who'd shown Lily what a good man looked like. Yes, she said, absolutely yes. The ring was beautiful, but not ostentatious, perfect for someone who valued substance over show. Hannah slipped it on and pulled Adrian to his feet, kissing him. When they told Lily the next day, she shrieked with joy. Does this mean Adrian is my dad now? If you want me to be, Adrian said carefully. Lily threw her arms around him. Yes! And that, Hannah thought, was what happy endings actually looked like. Not fairy tales, not rescues, but choices. Work. 2 people deciding every day to show up for each other. 6 months later, they married in a small ceremony at the house. Scholarship recipients served as ushers. The cleaning staff from Blackwell Innovations attended alongside the executive team. Marcus, the custodian who'd befriended Hannah years ago, walked her down the aisle. It wasn't elegant in the society page sense, but it was real. It was theirs. And as Hannah stood beside Adrian, holding his hand, while Lily bounced excitedly in the front row, she understood something fundamental. She hadn't been saved. She'd been seen. And that had made all the difference. The accident on 6th Avenue hadn't been destiny. The job offer hadn't been rescue. What had changed her life was simply this. Someone had looked past her circumstances and seen her value. And that recognition had given her the space to recognize it herself. She was still the same person who'd promised to pay for a car she couldn't afford. Still the same woman who'd fought to keep her daughter safe and healthy. Still Hannah.
But now she was Hannah who knew her worth. Hannah who had help when she needed it. Hannah who could help others the way she'd been helped. The minister pronounced them married. Adrian kissed her. The small crowd cheered. And Hannah thought about all the single mothers out there, fighting the same battles she'd fought, wondered how many of them would get the same chance she'd gotten, vowed to make sure more of them did. Because that was the real lesson.
Not that hard work always pays off, not that kindness always wins, but that when those with power choose to see those without it, when they choose to build bridges instead of walls, everyone rises. The reception lasted until midnight. Lily fell asleep on Adrian's shoulder. Hannah watched her husband, her daughter, this life she'd somehow managed to build from the ruins of a rainy morning collision. And she understood, finally, that she deserved this. Not because of luck, not because of charity, but because she'd never stopped fighting, never stopped hoping, never stopped believing that better was possible. Sometimes destiny arrives in chaos. Sometimes it looks like disaster. Sometimes it's just an accident on a wet Seattle street between two people whose worlds weren't supposed to touch. But if you're brave enough to show up honestly, to keep going when it's hard, to accept help without shame and offer it without judgment, then sometimes, just sometimes, the story ends not with rescue, but with recognition. Recognition that we all deserve to be seen, to be valued, to build lives that matter. Hannah Collins had been seen. And now she would spend the rest of her life making sure others were too. That was the happy ending. Not the wedding, not the house or the money or the security, but the choice to turn her pain into purpose, her struggle into strength, her story into hope for someone else facing their own rainy morning, their own broken motorcycle, their own moment of desperate promise to pay back what they cannot afford. The accident changed everything, but what came after, that was all Hannah.
And it always had been. Now it's your turn. Rate this story from 0 to 10 and let us know what you thought in the comments below.